In 2022, I had this crazy idea of making a Lunky-themed horror game. Just like the other Markiplier games I made, this one would also be a short one, but instead of a linear walking simulator or a top-down horror game disguised as a clicker game, this idea was for a tiny roguelite game where you go through random generated levels, killing Lunky-type creatures, getting some sort of currency to buy upgrades to be strong enough to face the actual Lunky. However, I always had some issues with this idea. First of all, I wasn't sure if horror roguelite would even work, but the most concerning thing was I had never made a random generation system before. So I was hoping that the Unreal Marketplace, now called Fab, would have a random generation tool, which it did, but the good ones are really expensive. I'm also very lazy and I didn't feel like learning a whole new tool just for random generation. So I decided to scrap the idea for now. Fast forward to May 2024, while I was working on a completely different and unrelated project. Maybe I'll do a video about it, maybe I won't. Who knows? But I was having issues with it, and I thought a roguelite style of play would fit better to what I initially had. So for the first time ever, I decided to try and create a random generation system. I had super low expectations in my ability to make this, but to my surprise, I somehow figured it out? Wait a minute, am I a genius? Nah, you don't need to be a genius to make random generation stuff, but all of a sudden it hit me. Hold on, if I can make a random generated level, maybe I could try and do that Lunky horror game idea. So I scrapped this game and immediately started working on that instead. I thought I could make a really teeny tiny small game for his birthday in June of 2024, which would give me a total of a month to work on it. In hindsight, it's ridiculous to think that I could pull this off in just a month, but I know what you're really thinking. Birthday of 2024? Lix, it's 2026, my dude. It sure is. Anyway, this is how I made Project Lunky. That took me 1.5 years to make. You know what's the worst thing that could possibly happen to the game you've been working on for 1.5 years? Your computer explodes and you lose all of your work. This is where this video sponsor, Diversion, comes to save the day. Guys, I finally got a sponsor. I'm a real YouTuber now. Diversion is a source control service, which basically means it creates online backups of your project, in case something goes horribly wrong. And I didn't want just any sponsor for my channel. Preferably I want a product or a service that I actually use, or that I think can be legitimately useful to me or you guys. And Diversion is one of those services because I actually used it while developing this game, and I will continue to use it for future projects. The two big things I liked about it were incredible ease of use. I literally just select the folder of the game project I want to back up, and Diversion does all the setup for me. And when I make any change to my game, I just go to the software, click this button, I write a useful description, and click commit. It's that easy. The other thing was, most source control services give you 1 GB of storage on the free version. And you know that if you download one high-quality asset pack from Fab, you are already over that threshold. Diversion gives you not 1, not 10, but 100 GB of storage for free! They also have a plugin for Unreal and Unity as well. I didn't use it, but if any of the files have been changed since the last backup, you can actually see it in the engine. And if one of your teammates is working on a file, the file will be tagged so you don't have merge conflicts later on. Also, with the plugin, you can do your commits from inside the engine without needing to go to the standalone software. Am I an idiot? Why didn't I use this? They also have extra features like shelves, reviews, and webhooks. I don't know what those are, but they sound useful and cool. They also have a Discord server in case you need any help. I should have joined this server a long time ago, huh? Moreover, if you are working on a bigger game and you need more than 100 GB, or if you have a big team, Diversion is hooking us up with a 10% discount on all yearly subscriptions. Just make sure to click the link in the description and use code LIX10, that's LIX10 on checkout, and get 10% off your yearly subscription. Thank you so much, Diversion, for sponsoring this video. Now back to the Lunk! The random generation system is nothing special. It literally just spawns a bunch of rooms in front of each other and makes sure they don't collide. That's pretty much how it works. The rooms do have different exits the generation can pick, so it's not just a straight line all the way through. Once all the rooms spawn in, that's when the system spawns what I call the special rooms. The end room, the loot room, or the lore room. After that, it spawns all the enemies, and if nothing breaks, the level begins. This is a very surface level explanation of how the whole system works. works. Programming-wise, it's a little bit more complex than that. Not that it's crazy complex, I mean, if my smooth brain could figure it out, it can't be that complicated. However, I am quite proud of how it turned out in the end. I know it's not perfect though, and I'm sure someone will have something weird happen, like having a room spawning inside another room. With how good Mark is at breaking games, I'm sure that someone will be him. But okay, we have random generated levels, but the player just walks around like an idiot, doing nothing. We're gonna need weapons. Remember, at this point in development, I was still trying to get this ready before June 28th of 2024, so I thought, okay, I'm only going to make 2 weapons. So what are the most iconic weapons in the Markiplier lore? A tactical shovel? A boar spear? No. It's the axe and the revolver. So I went to Fab and I grabbed a pack with multiple axes. They are more tomahawks than axes, but who cares? They chop and that's all that matters. And a really cool 8 rounds revolver, which is not really the same revolver, but it looks cool. And it was the only good one I could find. I also grabbed these first-person arms pack. The whole thing about this game is that you are the player. So having the arms covered up with long sleeves and gloves was, to me, a good way to make sure everyone can feel included. One thing these arms had was something called a control rig, which is basically a bunch of widgets you can use to animate the arms. Now, in my late night mob video, I mentioned that in Unity you could create animations inside of Unity, and that for Unreal, there was no real way of doing it, as far as I knew. However, with control rigs, you actually can. So instead of having to export the arms into Blender to make the animations and then import them back into Unreal, I was able to make all the axe and revolver animations inside of Unreal, which was really cool, and it saved me from the headaches of importing animations to Unreal, which, as we will see later, can be really annoying. I also made a very simple interaction system to be able to pick up the axe, and it was ready to be expanded for other items, like the medkits and the ammo. Now we have all these animations and nothing to slice or shoot. We need the enemy. Okay, first, I need to give a huge shout out to Molly Brown, also known as Deadly Melodic. She is an incredibly talented 3D artist who is amazing at just making the most nightmare fuel art possible. And she made this handsome boy. This is Split Lunky. Thanks, Molly. It's perfect. Now, before we could start killing these adorable cutie pies, I needed to rig it first, which is a pain, and I don't like doing it. Rigging is basically adding bones to a 3D model so you can pose the character and do animations. After that nightmare was over, it was time to do the animations. Now, I really wanted to do these animations in Unreal like I did for the arms, but since I was in a rush, I decided to just do them in Blender instead. I did a few animations like idle, walk, or float, I guess, and 2 different attacks, a left and a right slap. There was a third attack, but I ended up not using it. So I just made the third attack be the left and the right slap in quick succession. Then I had to import the animations into Unreal. Let's just say Split Lunky was having a really bad day. With the animations in Unreal, now I needed to program the behavior, which was not too complicated. The Split Lunky will just wander randomly within a certain radius. It also has a sphere trigger around it that if the player touches it, it will run straight to them and start attacking. Now, there's 2 issues with this approach. One of them I discovered right away, which was if the player was in one room and the enemy in another, but the player touched the trigger, the enemy would immediately start running towards the player. But only the player can open the doors, meaning that it would be a jump scare every time you open the door. To fix this, I kept the sphere trigger behavior, but every time the player enters it, the enemy will start firing an invisible ray from its location to the player's location. If there's an obstacle between them, the enemy will ignore them. But as soon as there's no obstacle, the enemy will attack instantly. So that fixed this issue, but there was another one that I only noticed way later in the development of the game. And the issue was with the enemy attacks. The way they attack is, as soon as it reaches a certain distance between it and the player, I basically added a physics force to the enemy so he would fly into the player's position while attacking. And for a long time, I had no issues with this approach because most rooms were flat surfaces. But the moment I introduced stairs into the game... So the way I do this now is, before attacking, it fires an invisible ray, we game devs love our raycasts, from the enemy's location to the player's location, and whatever location the ray hits, I just move the enemy to that location. Not a perfect solution, but it works. And as long as it works, that's what matters. Hey, you still got it. But now we have some enemies we can axe and revolve. While I was programming the weapons and the enemies, I also made sure to program all the functionality for the upgrade system. That way, when I later made the store, I just had to update a few variables to make everything work. I know, I'm very clever. I'm also running out of time. Oh my god. Again, thank you, Molly, for making these adorable nightmares. Without the enemy models, I would not be able to make this game since, you know, it's all about these little muffins. Now, you will fight these guys a lot, and I mean a lot. That's not even an exaggeration. That's because, aside from the boss, which Molly also modeled, this is the only enemy in the game, unfortunately. However, Molly made a few more models. It wouldn't be a Markiplier game without our favorite pink-mustached man, Wilfred Warfstache. It's either him or Damien. It needs to have at least one of them. First thing I needed to do was to rig him. And after Split Lunky, I really didn't feel like doing it. So since he is a humanoid model, I decided to just use the good old trusty Mixamo, which, as expected, worked like a charm. Now, I was going to make this guy yap a lot. And lip syncing is cool and all, but it's very time consuming. So to make this simpler for me, Molly made it so that the body and the face had two different materials. Then in Unreal, I created a material by using this tutorial and using an image with a set of faces by simply changing a single number. I could switch between different facial expressions. It actually ended up being 3 images in total due to how many facial expressions there were. So I had a number to select the set of faces and then another to select the desired expression. Not only that, but later on I also added yet another number that would be used to control Warfstache's pose. However, the rigging and facial expressions changing were the only things I did related to Warfstache at this point. The poses and the dialogue system came way later in the development. First, I needed to make Warfstache's home, the hall. The hall had a couple of different iterations during the development of the game, and it ended up looking like this, but initially it was looking more like this. I did not have the big door at first. That came way later in the game, but I think it was a good addition to the hall. Every time you spawn in here, it's the first thing you see, so you never forget what your primary goal is. However, I ran out of time. I remember being really disappointed. This was supposed to be a very short game, like done super quick, but it just shows how naive I was considering I thought I could pull all of this off in just a single month. Let's not forget I have a job on top of this. I've done games in a short amount of time, but I was not ready for the massive undertaking that this game was going to be. And after this, I just kept changing the deadline. First to Halloween 2024, then Christmas, but when I couldn't do that, his birthday in 2025, then Halloween again. The biggest issue I had was the more time I give myself to work on this, instead of sticking to the plan to finish it as quickly as possible, I kept adding more and more things to the plan. We call this scope creep. And by the end of this video, you will see that if there's something I'm good at, is scope creep. But okay, now with more time on my hands, the first thing I needed to do was the Warfstore. I divided the upgrades into 3 sections: stats, axe, and revolver, with one main upgrade that would unlock both upgrades below it, and then a chain of 2 more upgrades for each one of those 2. Most of these were pretty basic though. Aside from the axe upgrades, which actually changed the look of the axe, all the other ones just changed numbers behind the scenes. But I actually ended up changing 2 of these upgrades later on. With the already prepped code for the upgrades, making the actual shop logic was not too bad. I honestly had a harder time making the shop look pretty than programming all of it. Now, with the store done, I needed a way to make the player earn some money. Now the thing is, the game actually has 2 currencies. Teeth that are dropped from the Split Lunkies, and Warf coins, baby! Now you might be asking, why are there 2 types of currencies? But don't worry, this is not a mobile game microtransaction situation. That's for the Roblox game. To explain the currencies, I need to explain how the game loop works. So, you start in the hall, then you go into the wormhole to start a new run. You kill a few enemies, they drop some teeth, you get said teeth, then get murdered, go back to the hall. The store only accepts Warf coins, so you need to exchange the teeth you gathered for Warf coins, buy upgrades, rinse and repeat until you can do a run without dying. Now here's the catch. When you go through the wormhole, all the coins you have will be destroyed. But you get to keep all of your teeth. This way you kinda have to strategize when and how many Warf coins to convert, making sure you are only converting exactly the amount you need. Now I'm not gonna stand here and pretend I came up with this idea. This is heavily inspired by Rogue Legacy. Except that game only has one currency and it resets every time you start a new run. There are upgrades to keep a percentage of your coins later on, I know, but for the most part, especially in the beginning, it's a full reset. So yeah, this game is basically Rogue Legacy with extra steps. Later on, I even added more things for you to purchase with your beautiful Warf coins, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I just needed a model for the teeth and the Warf coin, which were made by yours truly. Oh, that's big. The tricky part was figuring out how to get the teeth from the split Lunkies. I initially was thinking of having them just drop on death and you could just pick them up, Resident Evil 4 style, but it was so boring and it looked weird. So instead, I just made them burst violently out of them. Now, I still needed a way to convert the teeth into Warf coins, but before that, I decided to make rooms. And I needed rooms. Lots of them. For the rooms, I made a quick sketch with a bunch of options with different shapes and sizes that could be interesting to navigate. After that, I just had to pick my favorites and start assembling them in the engine. However, while I was making the rooms, something interesting started to happen. The more rooms I made, the better I got at making rooms. Which means that by the 20th room, I hated the first 10. And now I'm going back to those rooms to add a lot more detail to them so that they can all have roughly the same level of polish. Some rooms I ended up not using at all, or just straight up deleting them, either because they were not interesting or because they were just too damn big. It was something that never really crossed my mind while making the sketch, but the bigger the room, the more work I need to put into it. I feel like I should have seen this coming. The last few rooms I made were very tiny, just so I could finish them faster. The most difficult part was making sure the rooms looked like they had been completely destroyed. Well, I didn't do that to every single room, but they at least have an overall vibe of death and chaos. Like the split Lunkies have definitely passed through there. Nothing a knocked over table and a few blood decals can solve. I also really liked using physics placement to scatter objects in the level. For certain rooms, I use this technique a lot. It makes the placement of the objects feel very natural as opposed to placing them manually. For the doors, I was using this asset pack, and although they looked fine, I wanted something that would make more sense in the universe. So I grabbed the door frame I was using, imported it into Blender, and made a couple of custom door models. I think they ended up looking good enough and felt more like they belonged in the game. Now, I didn't do all the rooms in one sitting. As I kept developing, I kept making more and more. As time went on, the lore of the game also kept changing and expanding, so I needed to create certain rooms to align with that vision. Unfortunately, I didn't do enough. If there was something this game desperately needed, was a lot more content in the form of rooms. Because by the third run in a particular level, you most likely already saw everything. The game has 3 levels in total, or as I call them, generations. And I ended up having about 7 rooms for each level, which is not a lot, especially considering each generation spawns 7 rooms in total. It also doesn't help that my procedural generation system doesn't store the previously spawned room, meaning you can have a level with all the rooms being exactly the same. The odds are low, but it can definitely happen. So yeah, you will end up seeing a lot of the same rooms after a while, although I did try to spice things up a little bit. During development, I had this crazy idea. What if, every time you were about to start a new level, there was a random chance of an anomaly occurring? An anomaly could be something like every light being off, or having a crazy amount of split Lunkies spawn in. That would be a great idea, but of course, I didn't do that. I'm trying to finish this game as quickly as possible, remember? So of course I didn't have time to add anomalies. So I added anomalies to the game! Every time you start a new level, there is a small chance that an anomaly will occur. But that small chance keeps getting bigger and bigger every time you start a new level and don't get an anomaly. The anomalies I initially had were blackout, all lights being off, manifold, double the amount of rooms to spawn, and hell, spawn split Lunkies in every room. I think it was a good addition to the game, and it definitely adds a little tension every time that text pops up, and it was also the inspiration for the logo of the game. But enough of adding random stuff, I still need a way to convert the teeth into Warf coins. Everyone, I introduce to you The Warfstache coin converter. I made the model, it's not very good. This was supposed to be a very simple machine that had a very simple task. And yet, it was the biggest math issue I had the entire game! First of all, since 10 teeth are equal to 1 Warf coin, I had to make sure you couldn't add more than the amount you have. Let me explain. If you have 15 teeth and press the +10 button twice, I had to make sure to cap the amount so you wouldn't waste extra teeth. That one was a little tough, but not as bad as what came up next. The coin drop. I decided that after converting the teeth, the coins would fall into this little container in the bottom, which was a mistake. I initially wanted each coin to be worth just 1 Warf coin, and to drop the total amount of coins you converted. But after like 20 coins, the frame rate would dive bomb into a slideshow, running at like 2 frames a second. And considering you can easily convert like 200 coins by the end of the game, that would be a huge problem. So I had to do some funky math to make sure that there is a maximum amount of coins that the machine can drop while adding up the total amount of Warf coins you converted. I know that most game devs could make this with their eyes closed, but I was down to my last brain cell with this one. The worst part of all of this was that most playtesters would convert the coins and would immediately start running towards Warfstache because they would forget to pick them up, meaning all of this work could have been avoided because most people are expecting it to be automatic. But I do think it looks really cool when the coins drop, even though it's a bit of a pain to grab all of them every single time. Now, I needed to create more ways for you to spend your hard-earned Warf coins, so it was time to create the shops. The way I initially wanted the game to be was, you go in the portal, then you have a level, a shop, a level, another shop, then a tougher level with a showdown at the end with a bunch of split lunkies, followed immediately by the final boss. All of it had to be beaten in one go. I eventually switched it up to have the final boss separated from the normal run, and instead at the end of the showdown you get the key to open the boss door. This is why the big redesign of the hall happened. The goal for them initially was to be able to simply buy ammo and medkits. But what if I made temporary perks? Like you could buy one or multiple perks that you could use in your run, but when you died, you would lose all of them. It would give you a bit more options to use the teeth, the coins, and the converter, and hopefully different ways to engage with the game. I mean, it would be a cool thing to add, but I couldn't do that. We're on a time crunch here, guys. I can't waste time adding more, so I added perks to the game! By the end, I had a total of 11 perks. There are perks like a teeth magnet, which is very useful when there's a bunch of teeth flying around, and especially when there's holes. There's one that makes you invisible to the split lunkies, and many more. Or I guess 9 more. But okay, we got levels, currencies, upgrade system, anomalies, and perks. However, there was something important still missing from that level sequence, which was the showdown. The biggest distinction from the other levels to this last one is actually the first room you encounter. On the first 2 levels, you start in a very small room, and every room after that is part of the random generation. Your goal is to go from room to room and to find the wormhole. That is your exit. But on this last one, I decided it needed to be a little bit more interesting than that. So you still start in a very tiny room, but the first room after that is actually your exit. Except the way you need to go is blocked by a big locked door. Adjacent to that room is a small office with a keypad that is expecting a 5-digit code. There is also a third door, which is where the normal generation happens, and you need to explore it so you can find the room that contains the code to open the big door. This code is also randomly generated every time. Only then you can go to the final room, face the onslaught of split lunkies, and find the key to the door. After that, I made the boss, which I'm not going to show here. In case you haven't seen it yet, I'd rather you experience it yourself. But long story short, it was a nice challenge to program. It wasn't as complicated as I thought it would be, surprisingly, and I think it turned out really cool, tense, and cinematic, especially after adding the music, but we'll get to that in a moment. At this point, the main playable areas of the game were completed. They still needed cutscenes to wrap up the plot, but as far as playable areas, it was all done. So now it was time to make this little guy talk. I decided not to use any pre-built dialogue asset and instead made the entire system from scratch, because I needed to make sure the dialogue would play nicely with my specific character. The dialogue needed to display the text one character at a time, change Warfstache facial expressions and pose, and I needed to have the ability to fire events at specific lines. I had done a dialogue system in Unity before, but this one was completely different from that one, so it was quite challenging, but surprisingly it wasn't something that gave me too many headaches. So I opened Blender and started doing poses for Warfstache. Like, a lot of them. After that, what I needed was some Warfstache noises. I borrowed these videos from Mark.
I killed Santa Claus.
I chopped a bunch of little sound clips from them. And we have a dialogue system. Now it was time to start making the cutscenes. But I had a tiny little idea. Okay, hear me out. What if I added a whole new map? Like, it would be a new anomaly that would transport you into a pool rooms-like area with multiple paths and interactive water and stuff. I know Mark likes the back rooms, but I personally prefer the pool rooms. I think they look way cooler. But it would be a cool idea, right? Too bad I didn't have time to add. So I made the pool rooms. To speed up the process of creating this map, I used something called a triplanar material. If you put a standard material on an object and then try to scale it, the material will get stretched. But if you use a material that is set up to use triplanar projection, you can stretch the cube and the material basically stays the same. So I used this one material to basically cover the entirety of the pool room. So that definitely sped up the process. But then I decided this needed to have 3 different paths, and I used the same asset from the 5-digit code on the last level, but with just 3 buttons with different colors, where you could only press one button and the door with that color would open and you would be locked on that path. So you need to get here at least 3 times to see everything the pool rooms have to offer. I was trying to make the pool rooms a bit more interesting, because if it was just one linear segment and you got back here again, it would be very repetitive. I also made balls for some reason. I don't know, they felt very pool roomsy. You can push them around and stuff. So yeah, you can play with balls. What else did I do in the pool rooms to make my life more miserable? Oh, that's right. I made a door that only opens when you press all 3 of the colored buttons. Every time you press one of the buttons, the light with that color turns on, and it stays on until you press all of the buttons. And there's a very big secret in there, so it's totally worth it and definitely not a waste of time. Now, the lab was supposedly destroyed by all the split Lunkies, but there were no dead scientists anywhere, so I needed to add that as well. I thought about using metahumans. You know, the fancy build your character like it's The Sims metahumans, but the clothing options are very limited. But then I decided to take a peek at Blender Market, which is now called Superhive. I took so long making this that even Blender Market went through a full-on rebrand. And in there, I found a plugin called Human Generator Ultimate. The name says it all, but it basically allows you to create characters like in The Sims. They have different types of hair and clothing, and lucky for me, they had a scientist's outfit. So I started making a bunch of different scientists, having a ton of fun, and they looked incredible in Blender. But then I imported them into Unreal. After an obnoxious amount of trial and error, I was able to import them into Unreal. I also added Cat. Cat is obligatory. In some way, shape, or form, Cat must exist. Otherwise, members will kill me. Okay, guys, time to get serious. I'm looking at the level sequence I made, and I think it's a bit boring. I initially thought of making a Slay the Spire type map where you could choose where to go, but that seemed a little excessive. However, I could make it so that every new run generates a random sequence from a set of different sequences. I would create a handful of different options and the system would just pick one of them at the beginning of a new run. No, this is fine. It works perfectly well. It has no problems whatsoever. So I made different level sequences. To display to the player what the run is like, at the beginning of every level, it shows the entire sequence and where you currently are. It was a bit more complicated than I thought, to be honest. Not only because all of the logic I needed to make it work, but also the UI needed to update correctly, and that was a bit of a pain. Hold on. This game is missing something. Something that all the other games have. What exactly, you ask? Achievements? No, that would be so silly. Why would this game need achievements? So I made an entire achievement system for some f***ing reason. Wait a minute. I know what's the one thing that's keeping this game from achieving its true potential. A parry system? So I made a parry system. For some reason, I looked at the upgrades and I was like, I need something a little more exciting than numbers going up behind the scenes. So the first thing that popped in my mind was this. So I made it. In all fairness, it was quite fun programming this, and the final result is very satisfying, but it also meant that I needed to do more animations for both the split Lunky and the final boss. It's like I didn't want this game to end ever. Like, I kept postponing the release date, so I kept adding more and more things. And this is why my greatest skill is scope creep. Well, to be fair, most game developers are great at this, so it's not like I'm special or anything. But this is why this game ended up taking so long to make. Not to mention the other more obligatory systems I still had to make, like a pause menu, options, or a save system. Like, this game is 1.5 to 2 hours long. It's the biggest game I've ever made. It would be cruel for a game like this to not have a save system. Oh, and I still needed to make the cutscenes. Oh my god! There were so many cutscenes. I think there are more cutscenes here than in Sinking Iron, and those were already too many. The only big difference here is that in Sinking Iron I made the music first, and then I timed the cutscenes to the music. The only thing I added after were the sound effects. But for this game, I built the cutscenes in a total vacuum. No sounds, no music, nothing. My plan was to record the cutscenes, import them into Ableton, the software I use to make music, and then build the music around the cutscenes. This is a very movie way of doing things that I honestly did not have to do, but it was quite a fun challenge to try and build songs around the cutscenes. This way, I could also have all the sound effects in the cutscene audio. So in Unreal, I just needed to have one audio file on the timeline instead of the audio management nightmare that was Sinking Iron. So after making all the cutscenes, it was finally time to make the music and sound effects. Okay, no big deal. I can make the entire soundtrack in like, what, a week? I hate everything. So yeah, turns out making music is hard. And unlike the rooms where I was making them on and off while creating different systems, this was just straight up music production from beginning to end. I didn't touch this game for 2 months. On the bright side though, I am very proud of this soundtrack. As per usual, we got a variety of songs. We got ambient music, we got sounds of the damned, we got a song about holes, I made a silly shop song for Warfstache that also has a little nod to the Warfstache clicker song. But more importantly, we got the sequel to Lunky's theme. It's the song you hear in the boss fight. It was the most complicated one to make, and it's definitely my favorite. Now, in my 2022 Unas Honest yearly video, one of my goals was to make more songs, and I mentioned that I didn't make a single one that year. Except I did. I did a very generic, low-effort song for a bit in a Markiplier video. For some reason, in that Markiplier video, some people were saying that they wanted a full version of that song, and in my Unas Honest video I said this. You were joking, right? You were most certainly not joking whatsoever. Okay, fine. You win. This song might be 3 years too late, but here you go. Still kinda generic, but honestly a huge improvement on the original one. All that was left to do was to add the songs and the sound effects to the game, which is always a fun endeavor. That's not true, it was not fun at all. In fact, I have terrible news. While I was making sure there was a splash sound when the player falls in the water, I couldn't make it work for the balls. So I had to remove the balls. I'm so sorry. But other than that, everything else worked mostly fine. I gotta stop adding the sound effects right at the end. This is a terrible habit. I should have learned this lesson by now. Anyway, I did a few rounds of playtesting, fixed a concerning amount of bugs, and bam! A year and a half later, the game was done. Easy. Barely an inconvenience. It's called Project Lunky, and unlike the other 2 Markiplier games I made, you can actually play this one. You knew that, I thought I made that clear, right? It's on itch.io and it's pay what you want, which means you can donate if you want to, but please do not feel obligated. You can just click the button that says no thanks, just take me to the downloads. One word of warning though, I tried making the game as optimized as I could, and there are options if you need to turn down the settings. By default, they start at medium settings, but this game is made in Unreal, and even though I'm not using Lumen, because dark scenes and Lumen don't really work well together, I can't promise your computer will run it. But fingers crossed that it will. But if it doesn't, I apologize in advance. Oh my god, this was a colossal undertaking for me. Unfortunately, it didn't turn out as scary as I wanted, not even close. I think the intro is definitely the scariest, but after a couple of runs, the fears wear off pretty quickly. The game needed a lot more rooms, and a couple more enemies as well, but at least I hope it's a fun game to play. I also hope this video made sense. I tried making it as cohesive as possible, but in reality, developing this game wasn't as straightforward as I made it seem in this video. My game development methods are absolutely chaotic. I'm shocked I was able to finish this game. Whew, after this game and all the movie stuff, I think I deserve some rest. And by rest, I mean jumping straight into the next big project. Later! I'm sorry for being away for so long, but now you know why. I really hope you guys enjoyed the game, and if you played it, please let me know what you thought about it in the comments. Thank you so much to all my members who supported me for almost 2 years without a single video or a stream. Yes, we did some Discord calls, yes, they knew what was happening, but still, it's a long time to wait for a project to come out. So I really appreciate the support and you believing in me, and I hope this project was worth it. Thank you again to Diversion for sponsoring this video. Thank you guys so much for watching it, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. Take care.